Violence on public transit becomes a growing issue in Canada. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. As of late, it seems that Canada's public transit system has descended into chaos, and that's across the country. There have been numerous stories about people who are doing drugs openly on trains and streetcars. There are people who are getting stabbed. There are people who are getting shot by BB guns. Public transit employees don't feel safe going to work. Citizens don't feel safe riding it. And we're at a point now where action is needed. The CBC reports that transit worker unions across Canada are speaking out amidst an out-of-control violent spike, and they're calling for a national task force to combat the situation. It's reported that there are over 3,000 transit operator assaults happening each year in Canada. And that's only the ones that are reported, and further, those are assaults about transit workers. Imagine the average citizen. How many times are they being assaulted, harassed, accosted, or being exposed to simple insanity? These numbers are unacceptable. Now, this report then goes on to say that strategies to tackle this increase in violence could include criminal code reforms, interventions, greater visibility of police officers on transit, deterrence, funding for mental health support, and so on. And this leads me to believe something about this call for a task force. I believe this task force is unnecessary. I believe what's going to happen is very expensive consultants are going to tell you what you already know. We see it right here. There are a list of plausible responses that we can administer right now. We don't need the government to take forever to assemble a task force. We don't need to hire Deloitte and pay them millions of dollars to tell us these things. What we do need is a government with backbone. Politicians who are willing to do things that may look unpopular to certain segments of the population to solve this issue. Now, between us, the government loves task force and consultants because when things go wrong, they can blame them. We were informed to do this, we were told to do that, and that's where the blame will head. They refuse to take responsibility for the very thing they're elected to do: serve the people and produce solutions. I feel like the average resident already has a deep understanding of the issues that we face and how we can go about solving it. So if you're going to tell me that our elected officials and those who are at the highest levels of employment in the public transit system cannot figure something out, I don't believe that. Now, one place where we can all begin is the very obvious root causes. One thing that's contributing to the issue here is this epidemic of homelessness and drug addiction in our major Canadian cities. There are people who are not mentally well, who are roaming around the city, finding themselves on public transport, and committing crimes. This itself is a major issue that has to be tackled uniquely. You need a strategy for this, and as it turns out, the current approach that we've taken in many large, left-leaning cities is not working. You can look at cities like San Francisco, places like New York, for examples of this. Homelessness and drug addiction have become worse, despite the millions and sometimes billions of dollars that are put into solutions. It's because these solutions are not good. In a nutshell, many of these cities deploy something like a hands-off approach. In fact, they sometimes will encourage you to do drugs and provide you space to do so, and then they're surprised when numbers see an uptick. And that doesn't mean that you can't be compassionate to these individuals. I believe you have to be. You have to understand their struggle. And with that comes the understanding that you have to do something effective for them. Tackling the addiction crisis doesn't mean getting more people to do drugs. It means getting less. And if your policies don't directly approach that, you've lost the script. These individuals need treatment. They need rehab. They need support. Some of which include, as the article said, mental health supports. What they don't need is to be enabled. What they don't need is to be let loose on places like our public transit system to cause chaos. That's not good for them. It's not good for the public transit system. And it's not good for the citizens. There is no win there. Truly, in short, the government has to get off its ass and do something. The hands-off approach is nonsensical. The issue continues to get worse, and it will do so continually until we stand up and say we need a practical solution here. Now, what that looks like is complicated, but I do believe there's a path forward. That's a discussion for another time, but I do want to visit another root cause here. Not all violent acts on public transit have to do with homelessness or drug addiction. There's also a cultural phenomenon. When you have 15-year-old children shooting other passengers and even transit operators with BB guns, that's not a drug problem. That's a cultural issue. It speaks towards things like their upbringing. It speaks towards things like the stimulus they're intaking that's making them think that's a good idea. Whether that's the music, the media, the messages, or whatever it is that they're absorbing that's leading them down this path. I know firsthand that there are some really stupid challenges that trend on places like TikTok. Many of these children are doing dumb things because they think they can get 10 seconds of fame on the internet. Then there are other reasons too. For example, poor parenting. School systems that don't really care anymore about things beyond your academic scores. Societies that have lost a sense of social cohesion. Everyone's being isolated. People not willing to hold each other accountable. And us not willing to hold the media accountable for the messages that they're displaying. No, not all things are equal. There are better and worse lessons, better and worse messages to give to our youth. Then you can layer on things like societal political beliefs. For example, there's a large group of people who think that defunding and further even abolishing the police is a great idea. There are people who think that the way out of this crime wave has nothing to do with policing and everything to do with funding more services, the standard strategy that we've seen in places like San Francisco, but people refuse to see the results of that thinking. Very obviously, that's a piece of the puzzle, the funding of social services, but that's not everything. It's a naive lens on crime. The police play a large role as well, and I've seen many people say that police don't prevent crime. They only respond to it. That's simply not true. There is something called deterrence. If a criminal is planning to commit a crime on the subway, but they see a police officer in the area, that crime is not going to happen. The police, very much so in this example, have prevented a crime through deterrence. And we need that. In many cases, we need more police officers, not less. The way this very simple equation goes over many people's heads is astounding to me. John Tory, the mayor of Toronto, is correct when he says he's going to increase police funding to hire more officers. That is the way to go. That is one part of the solution. I also believe, on the cultural note, that something like the bystander effect is not doing us any good. It just is a cultural norm now for people to witness acts of atrocities on the subway and to do nothing about it. In fact, they might just take their phone out and record, but they won't say anything. They won't intervene. And of course, there's also an issue of coordination. It often is very risky for one individual to stand up and to try and stop a individual having an episode or just a rowdy teenager with a BB gun. But if everyone stood up and had zero tolerance for such nonsense, and as a group they came together and put that person in their place, that'd be one way out of this issue. Not everything has to do with government programs. There is power in society as a collective as well. At some point, you have to look in the mirror and ask yourself, what are we going to do about this? Now, at the end of the day, trust and social cohesion are fundamental for a society to perform well. When people cannot trust the very institutions that they have to rely on to go about their daily lives, there's going to be outgrowths there. There's going to be things like the rise of vigilante justice. There's going to be things like a declining ridership on a TTC, which will increase things like emissions. There's going to be a distrust between citizens and their peers. These are not good outcomes. People have to be in a place where they feel safe to engage in a civic way. That has eroded in Canada, especially in big cities, over the past decade or so. I will say, though, I am hopeful. Having all of these articles and exposés on the growing violence in our communities is doing something. Politicians are finally responding. people are starting to ask questions, and we are going to find a solution. I do believe that. The question does seem to me how long it will take and how effective that solution will be. And I hope that by having conversations like this, we'll be able to improve those two metrics. And now with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the material, be sure to leave a review and share to help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.